Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 26th of July, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined by live video Skype link by Alex Thomson from Holland with Eastern approaches. Well, the weather's looking a little bit gloomy here. Summer has receded somewhat, so we've got grey skies with a hint of rain in Plymouth. And I think that's about it for the rest of the country. Gloomy times, Mike.
Indeed.
And what better way of representing the state of the country? Just before we came live today, I did tweet out we would be talking about the state of the nation. And here we've got a lady that encapsulates the whole picture in one go. So let's meet Lynn Homer. And she was reported in the paper a couple of days ago as walking away as Dame Disaster with a mere 2.4 million pension pot, as you do. And John Mann MP got a bit upset and he said Homer has been rewarded for failure. Well, the irony is, of course, that Mr. Mann is exactly right. This is completely true because she was selected, trained and paid to help break down UK, and she's done a great job as a common purpose leader. So she's been in everywhere, and we're going to remind people that where you see public policy which induces confusion and chaos, this should make complete sense to you, because this is the real agenda which is being unleashed to destroy UK. So this woman was a disaster in Birmingham. She was a disaster in the border agency, Ministry of Transport. We then get her into the HMRC, Treasury. She's done damage wherever she's gone because the agenda is to break up UK. And if you don't believe that from the Lynn Homer model, then we should bring in Ms. May.
Yes, because Theresa May was in Northern Ireland yesterday at Stormont Castle. And here's what she had to say during the referendum campaign. You said, speaking about the Northern Irish, you said it would be inconceivable that there would be no changes to the border in the event of a Brexit. What do you now see those changes as being? How do you define a hard border? And where in your mind is the border? Is it between the Republic and the North? Or is it between the North and the rest of the UK? So what she is doing here, this is a complete act of treason, Brian, because she's imagining the death of the nation, as it were. She's imagining the end of the Union. She went on to say, well, if you look ahead, what's going to happen when the UK leaves the European Union is that, of course, here Northern Ireland will have a border with the Republic of Ireland, which will remain a member of the EU. But we had a common travel area between the UK and the Republic of Ireland for many years before either country was a member of the EU. Nobody wants to return to the borders of the past. What we want to do is to find a way through this that is going to work and deliver a practical solution for everybody as part of the work we're doing to ensure that we make a success of the UK leaving the EU, and that's what, and that we come out of this with a deal that's in the interest of the whole of the UK. So, Brian, the deal that's in the interest of the whole of the UK is to break up the Union and to imagine a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of Britain.
Of course, Mike. I mean, we're just now seeing the fruits coming to the surface. This is the way I look at it. You want to understand what these people are about. Look at what they say, what they deliver. We've had Eric Pickles saying that he was an unlikely revolutionary who was going to change the whole look of the nation. We've had Tory MPs saying publicly, reported in the press, that the aim of the Conservatives was the constructive breakdown of the UK public sector in order to bring in the new regime, the new dawn. And that's what Theresa May is talking about.
Alex, what's your views on that?
Taking the long view on Northern Ireland, once every generation, Her Majesty's government makes a pronouncement that sums up how Westminster is thinking about the Union and Northern Ireland. In 1972, it was Sir Reginald Maudling, when he was the Labour Home Secretary, got back on his plane and said, "Somebody pour me a stiff whiskey, what a bloody awful place." So that was the view in the 1970s. Then we get to 1992, and Sir Paddy Mayhew, an Irishman himself, said when Northern Ireland Secretary, Her Majesty's government has no selfish strategic interest in Northern Ireland, and since then it's been clear that the Conservatives, although allied with the Ulster Unionist Party, wished to ditch Northern Ireland. Now, we've seen the back of the awful Theresa Villiers, the last Northern Ireland Secretary, but there's no need for her because we've got Theresa May saying things like that now, and no previous Prime Minister would conceivably ever have called Northern Ireland the North in a speech. That's Sinn Féin stuff. I mean, who's writing Theresa May's speeches? I think the worst of it is she may be writing or spontaneously saying this stuff herself. It's quite clear she's got no interest in retaining Northern Ireland. She wants to leave it to its fate, regardless of the will of the majority of people. It's worth remembering, of course, that the Northern Irish people did not vote for Northern Ireland to stay in the EU, nor did the people of Scotland vote for Scotland to stay in the EU. They voted for the United Kingdom to remain in the EU. That's the question they were asked. So there is no automatic read across from the vote to wishing to break up the union. Don't let anyone pull the wool over your eyes like that.
Well, that's an interesting comment you've made about Theresa May making up her own words, because when you look at the press releases that come out from the government with speeches, sometimes it says on it, this is a transcript of the speech as it was delivered, and sometimes it says on it, this is how the speech was written, and it may have been delivered slightly differently. Now, in this case, it was as delivered, it was transcribed as delivered, so it could well be that this was not a written speech, at least as delivered. It wasn't written by somebody else.
Quite possibly, and the main thing to bear in mind about the border is security checkpoints is one thing. We had them for a whole generation through the Troubles, but the CTA goes right back to the founding of the Free State in 1922, as people have been saying in the chat room. It's basic knowledge that. More to the point, the Irish Republic is not in Schengen, and therefore there is no rationale at all for a border from the point of view of people or customs, because Ireland already has, well, not tariff borders, but certainly security borders and passport checks for people flying from the continent to Ireland or sailing. So really the security issue is a smokescreen.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on then. I clarify that this was a story that I was going to cover yesterday, but we ran out of time. So this is a clarification and a correction from the Daily Mail. And it says, the first edition headline in an article on May the 27th about the funding of the organisation responsible for a controversial referendum advert referred to the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust as a pro-terrorist charity. We are happy to make clear that the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust does not support or fund terrorism. We apologise for the error. We're also happy to clarify that while JRCT is one of the two organisations providing core funding to Operation Black Vote, it had no prior knowledge of the advert and did not pay for it. Well, let's just look at the advert. Here it is. A vote is a vote, and it's got somebody on the right looking very aggressive, skinhead type, and really presenting the notion that anybody that would vote for Brexit was xenophobe, right-wing, racist,
extreme.
And who's behind this? Well, this is the organisation Operation Black Vote. Very similar, it seems, to Black Lives Matter in the United States. Designed, I believe, to set one community off against another and to drive that type of campaign. But what I thought was interesting was while the Mail had retracted their front page from the 27th, they had this article from a couple of days prior, and just a quote from this article is still available on the Mail website, so they don't seem to have retracted this. And it says, under the coalition, OBV received £85,000 as part of a £2.5 million campaign to get under-registered groups to vote. The Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust was established 100 years ago to promote peace, but now bankrolls supporters of terrorism. The trust, along with the Roddick Foundation, was investigated by the Charity Commission over its £300,000 support for Cage, the Muslim extremist group that described Islamic State killer Jihadi John as kind and gentle. So they seem to have retracted one thing, but they seem to be still standing by a previous article which says basically the same thing.
Well, I've got to say, Mike, what's just jumped off the screen now, and I'd missed this before, is mention of the Roddick Foundation. So we're now into funders around common purpose, which is extremely interesting. But of course, we've spoken out about this third sector of these agencies, non-government organisations, and also charitable trusts that are actually meddling on a daily basis in British politics. Huge amounts of money, And of course, it took the Daily Mail to blow the lid on Common Purpose and all the funders of Common Purpose. So interesting stuff. It looks remarkably like subversion, Alex, doesn't it?
Well, obviously, the prime way in which to subvert a country is to use the most innocuous fronts possible. And I've said it before, but if you want to look into what these foundations and trusts are about, look for the 1950s US Senate hearings into the tax-exempt foundations. If you just type in tax-exempt foundation hearings PDF, you will see how much these, what should we say, philanthropist organizations founded by tycoons around the 1890s, the turn of the 20th century, degenerated, as they were intended to do, into fronts for Marxism, really. With obviously tax exemption and the ability to go anywhere where churches and political bodies couldn't, because they were held to be, pursuing the public good, and no one could say a word against them. The Americans cottoned onto this in the 1950s. We don't seem to have yet, and we've had comments, okay, polite comments, but questioning us on the UK Column YouTube channel, saying, "What have you got against the Rowntree Foundation? They just go around doing good, don't they?" Well, I think it's a bit of a flimsy excuse these days. People are seeing what kind of things these people get up to, and the pools from which their policymakers and desk workers are recruited. You can have gone to a public school and Oxbridge and be ever so well presented, but still you could have been completely won over to the model of subversion. So the people doing the subversion are not even aware of what they're doing in many cases.
Yeah.
Right, well, let's move on to events in France, because, of course, Alex, you've been reminding us that France has been in a state of emergency for quite some time now. We've had what looks like a colour revolution going on there, lots of civil unrest in the last lot of months. But here we have an event this morning which takes things to a whole new level, because it seems that what early reports, things may have changed in the last few minutes since we came on air, but early reports I saw suggesting that the two men with knives that entered the church and slit the throat of the priest and seriously injured somebody else that was there, that these were two Muslim guys, that this was Hollande has apparently dropped everything and run off to Rouen where this took place, where I have no doubt as much political capital will be made as possible from it. But Alex, this takes this whole situation to a new level, because this is a direct attack on what many would see as being a core aspect of society.
It's particularly shocking for the French. Well, it would be anywhere to have clergy murdered apparently in a church, and even reportedly during a service, but even more so for the French, because they have this strict secularism which they call laïcisme, a lay state. And they've had that since 1905, and Belgium and Turkey, the other states in Europe that have gone that way. And notice the connection? Yes, they're all involved heavily in Gladio, and they all have huge issues with nationalist religious terrorism in their midst. So it goes to prove that the model many people in Britain are calling for, where we must have complete separation of anything Christian or religious from the government, is not going to lead us to paradise and coexistence, because it simply means that religious ideas are not discussed in society, and then they become the domain of those with the money and the determination to steer religions instead.
Okay, well, let's move on to this then. Alex, this is sending imams abroad who are prepared to kill.
Yes, the Dutch journalist who's tweeting here, Mehmet Gerrit, was talking to an imam in Dieren in the eastern Netherlands. And this imam comes from Diyanet. You can see the word there in the tweet and at the top, which is actually the Turkish government agency that sends imams abroad. And at the top here, he's saying, police, this is a scandal. This is a Diyanet imam who's calling for, or saying he's prepared to kill. And he was later claimed to have been misquoted, including by the mosque he was just leaving and going back to Turkey after serving. But look at the bottom there. He says in Turkish, in that many words, "Ben bu din için gözümü kırpmadan canımı da veririm, gerekirse can da alırım." So for the sake of this religion, I am prepared to yield my life, but also to kill, to take the lives of others. In terms, and he was prepared to say that because he was coming to the end of his term. There's a mosque of that persuasion, Diyanet, just a couple of 100 yards from me. I can almost see it from my house, and they're very nice people. to be sure, but they've got the Netherlands and Turkish flags on the door, and that's not just for decoration. It's because they are a Turkish state agency, that mosque, and their imam is appointed from Ankara.
Alex, this story was also covered in the Gelderlander paper, which we can bring up on screen. And you're getting into such an important point here that when people talk about Islam or they talk about Muslims or imams, just like the Christian church, you've got to qualify it. Are you talking about Catholicism? Are you talking about Methodists? Are you talking about Baptists? But what we've got here are government-sponsored religious people, which is a completely different beast to mainstream mainstream Islam.
Yeah, that's very much the point. I mean, I mentioned in Insight in our episode about Eurasia, which will soon be available on the UK Column YouTube video channel, which is currently available to members on the UK Column website under members forums. I mentioned in that one of the key events in world history was when Ataturk won the Turkish nationalist war after the Ottoman Empire crumbled. And of course, one of the titles of the Sultan, which crumbled, was that of Caliph, ruler of all Sunni Muslims in the world. And the state basically took over that function. And to this day, no religious headquarters is allowed to establish itself in Turkey independent of the state. But the Ministry of Religion can found this Diyanet body. And all through Germany, Austria, Benelux, wherever the Turks have settled, you see that Diyanet imams are sent out. All fine and dandy during the decades of secularism, when they were being told, you know, you're there to promote integration and good humanist values while being Muslim. But now Turkey is run by a different colour of government, shall we say, and that the inevitable repercussion of that is that the imams who are sent out are of, shall we say, a different persuasion, and they change the views of many Turkish Muslims in Europe, but also the perception of Muslims by the wider population.
Earlier, Alex, you mentioned Gladio, and if we look at this BBC article here, there's a Gladio-style event happening on a daily basis now.
Yes, I mean, that headline is just takes the biscuit, doesn't it? Okay, the BBC pulled it later and rewrote it, but it's just to stoke angry whites, really, isn't it, this kind of headline? Syrian migrant dies in German blast. It's almost like deliberately provoking people to tweet out, how dare the BBC, you know, to make the terrorist out to be the victim and call the attack a German attack when it was an attack by a foreigner in Germany. But you can see the game here. There's psychological manipulation going on in the headline.
Yeah.
And you've also got this one here from Politic, Alex, which is the Interior Minister of Bavaria, who was speaking out on that. I can just bring in a part of his quote there. If I read it very quickly, according to the Interior Minister of Bavaria, Joachim Herrmann, the 27-year-old Syrian who blew himself up in front of a concert stage in Ansbach on Sunday night, was previously known to police from other incidents. He said his asylum application had been declined a year ago, but since then he'd had the status of having his presence in Germany tolerated. What's the key point on this one?
The key point is that the Germans are being more honest, as usual, than we are, because they and the Dutch need to give everyone a status. So when his indefinite leave to remain, as we would call it in Britain, was declined, in Britain we would just say that there's no action been taken against him because we have a deliberately dysfunctional asylum and immigration system, as you covered at the top of the programme with Lynn Homer, who was previously in that capacity, or borders anyway. Germans and Dutch need neat categories. So this very conservative and quite honest Bavarian Interior Minister says, the day after the attack, no less, he says, yes, well, we couldn't give him asylum, so we decided to give him the status of Duldung in German, which means tolerated. In other words, we know he's illegal and we're not going to do anything about it. And the Dutch are doing the same, really. So when you see that, don't laugh or cry at the Germans. Think, well, the British government's doing just the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've got a pretty controversial headline on this one, Alex. Sometimes the UN and international law are useful. You're going to have to justify that one.
Yes, I should have nuanced it by saying sometimes the people in the UN system and international lawyers prove themselves useful. In this case, it's a gentleman from the Latin American culture and tradition, Mr. De Zayas, and of course the Latin Americans are very strong on human rights, as they would call it, and human dignity and so on. And from that point of view, he's employed as a rights and international law type at the UN, and he said that the mega trade deals that UK Column has covered TTIP, and more particularly TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because that includes a lot of Latin American countries on the Pacific coast. He's saying these actually are clean contrary to binding legal obligations on states that they've signed up to by a treaty to protect their workers' entitlements.
Do you want me to read this quote?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, okay. So he says, trade is not an end in itself, but must be seen in the context of the international human rights regime, which imposes binding legal obligations on states, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And he said trade agreements are not standalone legal regimes, but must conform with fundamental principles of international law, including transparency and accountability. They must not delay, circumvent, undermine or make impossible the fulfillment of human rights treaty obligations.
So this is just a demonstration that the kind of people who go into international law are not the devil incarnate, even if they work for bodies that are very suspect, like the UN. Okay, the people who founded and shaped the UN politically and economically are very, very dangerous people, and many are out-and-out Satanists who want population reduction, for which you can listen to yesterday's broadcast with Dr. Graham Downing for more detail. But the kind of people who go into international law, even those who end up at Chatham House, in one case is the former FCO deputy legal advisor who resigned on conscience and principle over the Iraq War in 2003. So that there are people around in international law who simply are there to point out that people need protecting by law, and that these deals, should we say, behind the scenes are no good and are actually illegal under the current obligations countries have.
Yes, okay. Well, let's move on. And we'll move on to banking. And this is a tweet that came out yesterday from the Bank of England. Central banks issue paper money. Well, that's a lie for a start. The Bank of England certainly doesn't issue paper money. It prints it when it is given in order to do so by the Treasury. It doesn't issue it by itself. Should they issue digital currency? And this is referring to this Bank Underground blog post. Now, Bank Underground blog is the blog of the Bank of England. Bank of England staff write for this. So if you're interested in these issues, go and have a look at it. And it's titled Central Bank Digital Currency, the End of Monetary Policy as We Know It. And yes, they are indeed thinking about the development of Bitcoin, as we've been warning for quite some time, and particularly the blockchain database technology that's behind Bitcoin. And they say central banks have long issued paper currency. The development of Bitcoin and other private digital currencies provided them with the technological means to issue their own digital currency, but should they? And they go on to talk about various issues surrounding this. And they suggest that we watch that space because mapping out the implications of central bank digital currency issuance is a very complex endeavor. They say it's helpful as a first pass to sketch out partial scenarios, as I've done in this post, for banking and monetary policy. But the devil lies in the detail. Research is going on, so watch this space. So this is definitely a direction that central banks are looking in. They've been hinting at it for quite some time. Every time they utter the words blockchain, it's looking like they're taking it a lot more seriously. And as from a liberty point of view, that's not a good thing.
Absolutely not.
Right.
I needn't say anything, I don't think there.
No, and speaking of liberty and freedom, let's have a look at the Investigatory Powers Bill, because this goes to its second reading in the House of Lords tomorrow. It's actually been at committee stage over the last few days. So they have, the government, at least in the form of Lord Geoffrey Howe, has confirmed that the Investigatory Powers Bill is or could be used to require companies to remove encryption from their software. In some circumstances, indeed, they could force companies not to use end-to-end encryption in future, in any kind of future service that they're developing. So here is Geoffrey Howe. He's worried that the ability of the police and intelligence agencies to intercept communications in an intelligible form would be considerably diluted if companies are allowed to continue to use encryption. It's a vital power that police should have the ability to hack encryption, but not to worry. It could be a bit of a tricky area, he says. So we can always fall back on hacking people's individual computers. if we can't get the full
what we need.
Yeah, if we get the full limitations on encryption, we can always revert to hacking individual computers. Alex, just a quick comment on that.
It's a threat, but it's rather a paper tiger threat, because there's no way in the world the best equipped signals intelligence agencies of any country can get close access to all those computers. Huge amounts of man hours and bugs and sometimes technical equipment physically present on the computer are needed for that kind of close access. Or you would need a spy point every 50 yards in the country, which is possibly what we're working towards anyway in populated areas. But no, it's an empty threat, and I think it's a sign that Lord Howe is quietly desperate. This is the man, don't forget, who stabbed Mrs. Thatcher in the back when she said no to the EEC.
Yes, okay. Now, Germany preparing for war with Russia.
I recommend this article because William Engdahl is a great geopolitical analyst of long standing, and it's just quoting. It's not made up by Eric Süss, the author himself. He's quoting from Deutsche Wirtschaftsnachrichten, German economic news, a quite respected site actually in its way. And he is talking about basically war gaming, as the military types would call it, and they are talking about offensive war against Russia. Which would, of course, involve invading Poland along the way, but that doesn't seem to have been an obstacle for the Germans in the past. And I would just highlight as well that Eric Süss, the author of that, has appeared with us on our Insights edition on Eurasia. So it sounds like I'm plugging it a lot, but it's really quite essential viewing for anyone who wants to know what's going on in the zone, shall we say, east of Vienna.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on to Syria then. And yesterday, Matthew Rycroft, who is the British ambassador to the United Nations, was speaking at the Security Council, and well, let's have a look at some of the things that he was saying. He was decrying the fact that the Syrian military have now encircled eastern Aleppo. Now, if you remember, this is something that when Patrick Henningsen was here, we were talking about quite extensively, because eastern Aleppo is the part of the city which contains the moderate rebel groups that are busy cutting the heads off children at the moment. So he is really concerned that they are being encircled by the Syrian regime, as he puts it. The current he is worried that 300,000 people are now effectively besieged, and that this is going to turn into a humanitarian catastrophe. It's already a humanitarian catastrophe. This part of Aleppo. So it's got ISIS, it's got Al-Nusra Front, it's got all the various moderate groups that are really behaving in a pretty unmoderate way.
Which is why, of course, we're not getting any proper reporting, are we? All that's happened is more or less a blackout.
Indeed, and I would just say to Matthew Rycroft, whose fault is this? I believe it is the fault of the British government, mainly.
Creating the problem in the first place. Suffer the children. Suffer
the children, because, of course, one aspect of the Syrian crisis has been refugee children. And here we have Baroness Prasher, and she is chair of the EU Home Affairs Subcommittee, in the House of Lords. That's an interesting combination of words there. And they've just released a report on this. And she said the current refugee crisis is the greatest humanitarian challenge the EU has faced in its lifetime. At the sharp end of this crisis are unaccompanied migrant children who are being failed across the board. We find a clear failure among EU countries, including the UK, to shoulder their fair share of the burden. We deeply regret the UK government's reluctance to relocate migrant children to the UK, in particular those living in terrible conditions in the camps near the Channel ports. It is particularly shocking that so many unaccompanied child migrants are falling out of the system altogether and going missing. How can member states, including the UK, tolerate a situation where more than 10,000 missing migrant children in the EU? We urge the EU institutions and the UK government to address these complex problems urgently. At the end of the day, unaccompanied child migrants are children first and foremost, and we need to work together to care for them in a decent and humane way. Well, I'm just going to remind everybody once again of this report released in 2012. A report from the Joint Inquiry into Children Who Go Missing from Care. So any Syrian or migrant child coming into this country is going to be placed in care. And I want to remind everybody of this report, because this is talking about children that go missing from care. The report says there is a scandal going on in England involving children missing from care, and until recent cases of child sexual exploitation in Rochdale and other places put the spotlight on this issue, It was going on pretty much unnoticed. There are also major problems with the quality of data collected on trafficked children. The number recorded by CEOP, approximately 300 between 2007 and 2010, is widely thought to be the very tip of the iceberg, and the lack of robust and comprehensive data was also identified by the inquiry as a key obstacle to keeping these children safe. And this report was talking about thousands of children going missing from care every year, and some of them come back, some of them don't, some of them go away for weekends and nobody knows what happens to them in that time, and they come back on a Monday morning or whatever it is. But let's just remind you of this article from The Independent a couple of weeks ago. 239 unaccompanied refugee children disappeared from UK care in 2015. This is the scandal. Aside from the fact that we've created this child migrant crisis in the first place, this is a scandal that these children are ending up coming, the ones that do come to the UK, disappearing from care and ending up what? Being trafficked, used for sexual exploitation. Yeah. Nobody knows because nobody manages the data properly and nobody tracks these children. So when Fallon, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron, asked for these children to be brought over back in February, and we challenged him on how he was going to protect them once he got here. He didn't reply to anybody's questions, including my own. Nobody is considering this. They've created a problem which is horrendous, but moving children into this country doesn't solve anything.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say to people, if you can stay with us to the end of the news, we're going to get back onto this topic. And we've got a particularly powerful interview which will follow today's news, which will explain some of the reality as to what's going on.
So what's next? Alex, De Linke Deputy Chairwoman, tell us a little bit about her.
Brilliant lady. This lady is outspoken in Germany in a way that we have not got a single British politician, male or female, I think, to hold a candle to her, if that's the right expression.
Absolutely agree, Brian. And you recently interviewed her ex-husband, who remains very friendly with her, and perhaps we'll play that when we have a good opportunity. But Sarah Wagenknecht is the representative of the good old left in Germany that's particularly voted for in East Germany, in the post-industrial, post-communist areas who've been disillusioned. And she has broken with the rest of her party, which is really hard left. You know, it's the equivalent of if the Socialist Workers' Party had got together with the Skinnerite part of Labour, and or the Corbynistas, and revolted against the centrists, basically. That's happened in Germany. And so that party, Die Linke, the left, has this Sarah Wagenknecht, and because she is a deputy leader of a party fraction, she often gets the opportunity to berate Chancellor Merkel in the Bundestag in Berlin, and Merkel usually studiously fiddles with her papers or pen, as they usually do, you know, when they're being panned like that. Well, Wagenknecht is actually saying, because it was yesterday was the first day of German political reaction to the Sunday night Ansbach massacre by a Syrian from the city of Aleppo, by the way, so he had his mind turned there, something proper by all the horrors going on there. But anyway, Sarah Wagenknecht said yesterday, in the light of these attacks, the Olympia shopping centre in Munich and now elsewhere in Bavaria, the Ansbach bombing at a concert, it's obvious that these migrant problems have given us more, that we've bitten off more than we can chew. And it wasn't as simple as the slogan Merkel gave us a year ago of "Wir schaffen das," we can cope with it. For this, she has been rounded upon by her leftist colleagues on Twitter. But very gratifying has been to see the number of Germans of all political stripes and none who've told basically the new left to get back in their box and let Mrs. Wagenknecht speak on behalf of the people who voted for her.
Yeah, remarkable lady.
And tell us more about the European left and how they're manipulating headlines, Alex.
Well, this was just to show the quality of the caliber of the people who are now realizing that you can't trust anything in mainstream press anywhere in Europe. This is by Theodor Dalrymple, who's written a series of brilliant books based on his experience as a prison psychologist and seeing the nation's mind being altered, really, and an underclass deliberately being created with no prospects. And he's now writing about how the European left manipulates you with headlines. And he's talking about Le Monde here, which is the French equivalent of the Times, as you can see even from the typeface there on the mat at the entrance of their office, and also from the sort of the sophistication of the journalists who are walking on it. You can see from their clothing. But Le Monde has got wind of the fact that we were cutting one of our rates, I think some kind of corporation tax, to 15%. And as if this had already been a done deal, Le Monde was berating us for fiscal dumping, which is an elegant French way of saying attracting people to pay tax, corporations to pay tax in Britain instead of France. So even floating the prospect of setting your own tax rate is called dumping now. It's, it's akin to using slave labor in Asia to produce good more cheaply than a Western country can. So it shows the hysteria involved, and Mr. Dalrymple's right. He uses the word left, but Daily Mail, Express, right-wing papers of much the same mould. So I would say more than left, I would say the mainstream.
Right, and we've got more, more trouble here with Les Echos, which is reporting about the fact that Europe isn't doing anything. So I'll just read out the quote here. If we can bring this one on screen, please, Theo. Here we go. Of course, national governments within the EU still have very important powers, sovereign militaries, but also tax-raising powers, education, organisation of employment. We simply have to observe that after the migrant crisis and the terrorist attacks in Paris and Brussels, the question everyone has been asking has been, what is Europe doing? So there seems to be trouble in the European mill at the moment.
And the point here is that Les Echos, which is the paper of the French businessman, its editorial starts off nicely by, for once, being honest and saying, since Maastricht, and in fact since the 1989 ruling in Strasbourg, European law has expressly taken primacy over French, British, or any other law in the EU. But it goes on from that position to set up this ridiculous argument, putting words in the mouths of the French people or any other people after the recent terrorism, as if the people of Europe are saying, what is the EU doing about this? Well, in all the continental countries I go around, I can tell you, apart from a few, academics and that kind of establishment type, I've yet to meet anyone while talking about these attacks who says, what is the EU doing? What they want to see is their own national and local police forces and their own judges tackling the issue. And if anything, they're complaining that the police and judicial systems are being hamstrung by the EU. But no, it's being presented as a pretext for the EU to set up security services and have a united defence ministry and troops, because apparently that's what the people want in the wake of these attacks.
And of course, Alex, Turkey features very big in all of this, and you've picked up again on Engdahl here, who's talking about CIA activity in Turkey.
Yes. Apologies for calling the last article by Engdahl. That one was by Eric Zeus about Germany preparing for war. This one is by William Engdahl, the geopolitical analyst, behind the CIA desperate Turkey coup attempt. And it's interesting how he draws lines across to other parts of, again, Eurasia. And Hungary, you could just about say, is the western fringe of what you can call Eurasia, because it's half in Western Europe and half in the landmass beyond, really. And Engdahl predicts that after the horrendous EU has been really detected by the public, that Brexit was the first bit of the disillusion, and then that Viktor Orban may be next to be toppled, because he's come out. He hasn't said he wants Hungary to leave the EU, but they are going to have a referendum on an EU-related issue in October, which is, should Hungary set its own migrant quotas regardless of diktats from Brussels? And on the same day, the Austrians are having a rerun of their contested presidential election, in which the Freedom Party man might still get in. So Austria-Hungary, which is still a cultural entity really, 100 years after it was dissolved, might on the same day in early October, the 2nd of October I think, might say up yours to the whole of the EU project, and that really will be something. But of course, there's still some months before that for colour revolutions to happen. And Hungary had an attempt at that in 2006 already.
Right, and you've got two articles here, one from Medal. This is purging. This is talking about Turkey purging judges and prosecutors in a matter of hours, arresting them and so on. And also this from the Telegraph about Turkey suspending the European Convention on Human Rights amid fears of further crackdown, and also the way that they've been treating the people that they've been arresting.
Yes, taking the last picture there, the big text there is about Lieutenant Colonel Levent Türkan, who's not in the picture. He was an aide to the chief of the army, and he'd obviously been duffed up after being taken into custody after the failed putsch. But the point I'm making is that these men are not all, hardcore Islamist plotters, or whatever you want to call them, Gulenists. They're people who are being got at, and you can see in the main picture there that guy who until recently was Air Force commander in some dirty striped polo shirt with his hands handcuffed behind his back. Ako Öztürk, he was one of the supreme military planners right up until the coup. So some very nasty stuff has been going on there. And behind that, the first thing you quoted was about an international association of lawyers, and well, more particularly magistrates and judges across Europe, saying, hang on here. Turkey has got rid of thousands of judges in one weekend, and nobody seems to care. And between them was that Telegraph piece saying Turkey has become, I think, the 8th or the 9th case since the Second World War of a member state of the Council of Europe suspending the ECHR. We did it for the Troubles, but it's rather a drastic step to take.
Well, this brings us back to my point, which people struggle with regarding human rights and the fact that they can be removed just as easily as they're given. And who the heck decides what our rights are anyway? If it's a human being, we're giving that person inordinate power. Is that not the case?
Well, it is, and you could see this shortly after the first European human rights legislation came in 1998 in the first Labour term. I joined GCHQ in 2001, and we were still being, or the existing staff was still being briefed when I joined in 2001 on what it all meant, because we were still trying to find our way. And one of the things they were saying was, forget English law. Well, they didn't put it that bluntly, but they basically said, forget English law and common law and God-given entitlements. What we now have is two kinds of laws, and to use the French terminology, droit absolu and droit qualifié. So an absolute right, and that's parts of the ECHR, like the right to life, for example. But you also have qualified, which means not really absolute rights. And these are, for example, the right to privacy and the right to a family life. So yes, your children can be taken away, and your emails can be read, and your computer can be destroyed if the state feels like it.
Yes. Right, we're running out of time, Alex. So just briefly on the book spot, please.
Well, that's just a brief mention of the fact that Darkness at Noon by Arthur Koestler, who lived through a lot of tyranny in the early 20th century, is a great book, whether you get it as an audio book or as a published book, because it shows really how revolutions eat their children. And this is the fictional account of someone who was a big shot in an absolute revolution, a statist revolution somewhere in Europe 100 years ago, who is then arrested, and he's on death row, and he's having lots of dark thoughts about what the revolution did to people. And if you read it, it's very applicable to the kinds of mentalities that are running us these days.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, eating the children of the revolution, eating the children. Mike, you've mentioned there that basically we don't know what's happening with the children. Well, the truth is out there, and we're going to say that UK Column is delighted that an extremely brave Metropolitan Police officer, John Wedger, has come forward to give an interview talking about what has really been happening in London, in Westminster, and around the Metropolitan Police in order to cover up child abuse. And we are streaming that audio interview immediately after the news today. Let's just move into that by having a very quick recap of some of the things that have been going on. And we'll just start off here with the demise of Exaro. Now, UK Column has always been highly suspicious of this organisation that seemed to have the in on some of the child abuse cases. They seem to be particularly good at creating a smokescreen almost, and they refused to get involved in a lot of the high-profile cases. But they had huge money, millions behind them. They were constantly promising that the true agenda of child abuse was going to be exposed, and they consistently failed to deliver it. This was part of the Times report, which was basically saying that this man, Mr. Thomas from the BBC, he's the boss, Kerry from Panorama, was lambasting Exaro, accusing them of damaging journalism by publishing wrong-headed articles, accusing a string of prominent people of being paedophiles. Well, let's remember this man because, of course, he was former Radio 4 boss, and he was pretty outspoken. Most female journalists do not have a thick enough skin to deal with the show's incredibly difficult environment. So you get the impression of a very unpleasant man. And interestingly enough, he was boss of this lady, Nicola Stambridge, who was going to investigate child abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, which UK Column had exposed. But she then said in a recorded interview that she was pulled off, and she mentions her boss, which we believe was Mr. Thomas. Critically, she said that although she'd failed to speak to any of the victims of that abuse, she had spoken to the very authorities who were covering up the abuse, and therefore she was satisfied that nothing had happened.
Yeah.
Well, here he is, boasting that he had got 10 mentions and 6.4k mention reach and 29 retweets. So Mr. Thomas is clearly very impressed with his self. And here he is moving up as head of Panorama, and glowing praise for the BBC. BBC's greatest investigative programme. Panorama is the linchpin of the BBC's current affairs output. Track record, Mike, of second to none, apparently, in breaking big and important stories, but not, of course, stories to do with child abuse. In fact, Panorama was actually used to help undermine people who'd been coming forward to say what was really going on with child abuse. And Andrea Davison here tweeted out that they'd approached her, as well as Chris Frey and Bill Maloney, asking suspicious questions. And all of those people, including UK Column, were sure the agenda was to unsettle investigation. Well, we remember this lady, of course, Jill Dando. What was she doing? She was looking at high-level paedophile rings in the BBC. But not to worry, because the BBC's investigated themselves. And, well, this gentleman said when he got close to the paedophile rings in Westminster and the establishment, he simply had his offices raided by the police, and hey presto, Mike, the evidence disappeared. Of course, there was no sign of Panorama in his case. Now we get to the meat of the issue, because today we've got this report in the Mail that the future of Britain's top policeman is thrown into doubt after victims of the Met bungled VIP paedophile probe called for the damning report to be published. So we're not interested in the child abuse survivors, the victims. What we're interested in is protecting the reputations of people who've been caught in the crossfire. And what has now come forward is something remarkable. This is an email. I'll put it on screen, but read it for you. We've sent it to Mr. Penning, who was the former Minister of State for Policing. And he said, we've said to him, can you please provide a written media statement in response to allegations received that in your recent post of Minister of State for Policing and Criminal Justice, you were fully informed of widespread and high-level child abuse and the corresponding cover-ups by the Met Police, public authorities, charities and others to silence police whistleblowers, where such cover-ups included threats and intimidation, and despite promising a full investigation into these matters, no such investigation has been forthcoming. Well, as we might expect, this gentleman, who's now been promoted into the Ministry of Defence as the Minister of State for the Ministry of Defence, there was no reply to the UK Column emails. His constituency office simply refused to contact him for us. The Ministry of Defence media team stonewalled. In fact, they got extremely agitated when we said, we want to be able to speak to him. They said this is nothing to do with his Ministry of Defence work. But I would suggest that if there had been failure in his previous post, that would impact on his Ministry of Defence performance. And the constituency office and the MOD put the phone down. There appeared to be panic, Mike. So why do you think that was?
Can't imagine.
You can't imagine. Well, let's have a look at what his duties were as the Minister for Policing. Here they are. Victims and Witnesses Policy, Chair of the Victims Panel, Criminal Justice, Out-of-Court Disposals, Criminal Law, Criminal Court Procedures, Miscarriages of Justice. So he was responsible for those. Restorative Justice and the Veterans Review. Well, where did our information come from? It came from an extremely brave Metropolitan Police officer. His name's John Wedger. And this man has blown the whistle on the fact that the missing children have been known about for years. They've been taken, trafficked and abused from children's homes across London and UK. And this movement and trafficking and abuse has been consistently covered up by the Metropolitan Police with the help of local authorities and charities and government ministers. And in a 1-hour interview with the UK column, Detective Constable Wedger spells out how his career has taken him into this cesspit and how he has been personally threatened and indeed his family put under pressure and harassed in order to stop him blowing the whistle on what has actually been happening with these children. And as you will hear in the interview, he starts to show the sheer scale of this because it's operating across the country and it has now been going on for, tens of years. So I would just like to say this is a remarkable interview. He is an extremely brave man. I'd encourage people to listen to this. And can I say to you, at the end of listening to what he has to say, if you believe he is worth it, and I certainly think he is, this information needs to be spread throughout Britain and overseas so that we can finally expose the criminal elite that is working through the City of London and our very own parliamentary system. I don't think I can put it stronger than that, Mike, but this interview is just phenomenal. I think we'll end on that note. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. I'll say to all of our viewers and listeners, please stay with this channel to listen to the live interview with Detective Constable John Wedger. Thank you.